Now, correspondent Jody Cohen was in Renana when this attack happened. So she has sent us this report from a bunker during the attack. Listen in.
Iran has started its attack against Israel. Sirens have sounded across the whole country, warning of an incoming ballistic missile. Simultaneously, there was a shooting attack near Tel Aviv in Jaffa. 2 terrorists started shooting and reportedly at least 10 people have been injured. The US believes that the attack from Iran would be similar to Iran's April attack, where it fired more than 300 missiles and drones. And IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari said to expect the attack to be large scale and wide in scope. Now, 1 hour ago, Israel's Home Front Command instructed people in central Israel to stay near shelters and limit gatherings. The Prime Minister said to listen to Home Front instructions to save lives and that there will be difficult days ahead, and officials are warning of a significant night. Reactions
are also pouring in from the United States. Just some time back, our correspondent Susan Tehrani joined us from New York, and this is the latest information she brought in from the region for us. Take a look.
So we also not only heard from President Biden, which you played his soundbite, we also heard from President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, saying that the naval destroyer that belonged to the United States had joined Israel in shooting down inbound missiles. He said that, quote unquote, there was meticulous joint planning in anticipation of the attack, meaning prior to the attack. Regarding U.S. troops, what we're learning is 2 U.S. naval destroyers had launched a dozen interceptors against the incoming Iranian missiles. Brigadier General Pat Ryder also made comments. That is the Pentagon press secretary. He told reporters that no American troops were hurt. And the Pentagon also said on Monday that it was sending several more thousand troops to the Middle East region to join the 40,000 American troops that are already there.
All right, there's lots to unpack here. We're now being joined by Charles Kupchan from Washington, D.C. Mr. Kupchan is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Kupchan, thank you so much for joining us right here on World DNA. At this point, Israel has already said that Iran made a mistake. US is saying there are going to be serious consequences. France is pulling in its military might in the region. And Iran, on the other hand, has already given that warning that if Israel retaliates, Iran will retaliate further and even more strongly. It's almost as if everyone has their guns pointing at each other. Give us your thoughts on what comes next.
I think we're clearly in the middle of an escalatory cycle. I think it's quite likely that Israel responds within the next few days. I think a key question is, what is the scope of that response? How hard does Israel hit back at Iran? And I think we'll see a strike that is much more substantial than the one that occurred a few months ago, in which Israel basically took out one particular air defense system, left it at that. The Iranians basically denied the whole thing, and there was a quieting down. I think that the strike will be much more substantial. I assume taking out perhaps energy infrastructure, maybe military targets. We don't know if the Israelis may in fact go further. But right now we're at a very dangerous moment at the edge of what could turn into a wider war. We'll have to wait and see what transpires in the next few days.
Right, Mr. Kupchan, also, we know that the UN Security Council session is to be taking place in New York now. Should we rule out any chance of ceasefire now? And are we just expecting an all-out war?
Well, I think we can rule out a ceasefire because there have been efforts going on for months now for a ceasefire in Hamas, in Gaza with Hamas. In Lebanon, the United States and France have been trying to broker a ceasefire deal, but there's no way that the Israelis are going to stop now in the midst of what is a very serious campaign to degrade Hezbollah. And I think Iran is in a very weak position now. Iran's main proxy in the region is Hezbollah. The leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, has been killed by an Israeli airstrike. We don't see the Hezbollah military able to communicate, to retaliate in the way that was expected. And so I think Iran was under a lot of pressure to act. It's difficult to say now whether we will in fact slide into a wider war, but I think it's very, very likely that there will be further hostilities between Iran and Israel. The big question is how wide and how broad will further strikes be?
Mr. Kapchan, you mentioned further strikes. Of course, it seems it's going to happen now. There's no question on that with the kind of rhetoric that we're hearing and, of course, the kind of statements that are coming in from different parts of the world at this point. Whether it's a direct confrontation with Iran or there have been other methods that Israel has also adopted in the past. There were the pager blasts, there was the killing of Ismail Haniyeh which happened in Tehran. Of course, Israel remained silent, so we have to say that it was reportedly done by or allegedly done by Israel. But at this point, we've seen that there are other tactics by which Israel can retaliate. Do you consider or would you think that Israel can also resort to some of those measures which Israel is a leap ahead in? No one saw those attacks coming and everyone was baffled across the world how and who pulled it off. Of course, allegedly it was Israel, but do you feel Israel can pull something like that off again by which they retaliate and yet don't take the blame for it directly?
Well, I assume that the Israeli response could in part involve an asymmetric response, going after Iranian targets that are outside Iran, in Syria, in Iraq. But I do think that Israel's theory of the case, the way it deters its adversaries, is to take the fight directly to them and to increase the pain to them. And as a consequence, I'm pretty confident that the Israeli strike will involve direct attacks on Iranian targets in Iran itself. Again, we don't know exactly how wide and how broad those attacks will be, but I do think that Israel now feels a certain confidence, given the campaign in Gaza, the successful campaign to degrade the capabilities of Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hezbollah being Iran's #1 proxy. I do think Israel probably sees this as an opportunity to take the fight to Iran itself. Iran, after all, is the puppet master of this so-called axis of resistance, and to try to send a message to the Iranians, you need to change course or you're going to pay an extraordinarily heavy price.
One thing's absolutely for sure, Mr. Kapchan, as you mentioned correctly in the beginning, this is an escalatory cycle that these nations are all stuck in. And of course, the repercussions are going to be felt across the world, as we have been seeing in the last 1 year. We're almost nearing 1 year since 7th October last year. Of course, things don't seem to be nearing any sort of an end or any kind of peaceful resolution anytime soon. Thank you so much for joining in, Mr. Kapchan. That was Charles Kapchan joining us from Washington, D.C., Senior Fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations.